Hey guys, Tim here, Big Dog Forge. Welcome back to the shop. It's good to see you again. So this time around, we're going to build a knife out of some mystery metal. Let's take a look at that and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright guys, I wanted to give you a rundown of what we're going to be using for this because I'm going to answer a couple of questions I've been asked online recently as we do this build. So on the right, A36 mild steel. Next to it to the left, metal cutting bandsaw blade, supposedly 1095 but still a mystery. Next to that, a Nicholson file, again should be 1095 but we're not sure. Nicholson file says that they sometimes buy whatever metal meets their specification and they can buy in bulk. So to the left of that, hex wrench made by the Allen Manufacturing Company, and they suggest that it's a 1070 or somewhere thereabouts, but don't know if there's any other alloys in there. I did a spark test and a quench test on it, and it's definitely hardenable steel, and we'll be using that as well. But again, a big mystery. Just to the left of that, we've got a piece of mahogany, we've got some ebony, a brass plate, and a little brass nut we'll be rounding this project off with. So there you go, guys. All right, guys, let's get to it, and we'll talk at the other end. Thanks. All right. So this is our mild steel, and we're going to start cleaning this off. Like I said, we want some nice flat surfaces. I know I did a video on dirty Damascus, and you don't really need to do all this, but I want some flat surfaces, and hardly any of this material I've got is flat, and I want to make sure we can get it all welded into a nice little chunk with no gaps in between it. That, and since I built a surface grinder, I might as well use it, right? Anyway, so we're swapping over to a little finer belt, and we're going to do these bandsaw blades. The ends were curled up on them where I broke them into pieces, so I hammered those flat, and then I'm just going to flatten them out the rest of the way with the surface grinder. And if you haven't seen the playlist build on the building of the surface grinder, you might check that out. I'll put a little card up top. You can go check that out if you want to. All right. This is my little vise I use to set up my billets with. A piece of mild steel, piece of bandsaw blade, mild steel, bandsaw blade. All right, and we're going to have an extra piece of bandsaw blade, so we'll put it in the middle. And this is going to constitute 15 layers. We've got 8 layers of the mild steel and 7 layers of the bandsaw blade. So the reason that I'm doing this is a couple of reasons. One is that there's been some discussion online about whether you should build blades out of scrap steel. And I wanted to try this anyway because I think it'd look cool. Anyway, so you saw me put that weld on the top of that thing. That was a little bit of a mistake. I didn't really want that there. And this side of the billet, the bandsaw blades are just a little bit shorter than the mild steel. So I took it over to the surface grinder and took the mild steel down to the bandsaw blade teeth and took a little bit of those teeth out of there as well. So it's a more even billet on that side. So I've had a couple of folks recently ask me if I wouldn't mind showing Scrappy the power hammer running in real time. So we'll get this thing into the forge and I'll give you a little bit of that so you can see what it looks like and the speed it operates at, give you an idea of how hard it hits. Alrighty, put some flux on that thing, get it up to welding temperature, and we'll get it under the power hammer here. There you go. The first weld was about, I don't know, 3/4 throttle. The second weld was full throttle on Scrappy. And so that's what he looks like when he hits. All right, we got one more weld on this thing. And we're going to hot cut it and fold it one time. So we're going to have a total of 30 layers. So this is going to be a low layer count. There you go. You can tell the difference between real time and sped up time there for Scrappy. We're just going to use my little axe here. Give it a little split. We'll wire brush the back of this thing. And we'll get some more flux on it. Get it up to temperature. Flux off. Fold it over. More flux on. There we go. So I actually made a pretty drastic little mistake here. We evened it up on the sides. And I never actually forged it down. I was going to leave that up to the squaring dies and go diagonally with this thing and do sort of a crushed W pattern. But without forge welding it together a couple of times first, it sort of slid sideways. Created some cold shuts on the outsides diagonally, and some cracks on one end of the bar. So we cut this bar in half, and you can see those cold shuts. And there's a little crack that runs just down from that. So we're going to have to grind that side of these two billets off. So we started with one, we got down to two, and we ground almost a third of that bar down to get rid of those cold shuts. But we've still got enough material. And this is where our file comes in. We're going to sand mine this around this file. And that's going to be our hard steel core. That'll make up our knife blade. And the mild steel Damascus will just be a jacket. Alright, so there was a little crack right here at the end. Now this end is going to be the tang end of the knife, so not too worried about it. And that area is going to be welded towards the file. We'll get this welded up. Get a handle put on this thing and get it back in the forge again. So I am not a bladesmith, and I've said this before. I don't pretend to be one, and I do not sell blades. And the reason is because there's plenty of guys out there who are professional bladesmiths, and they know what they're doing, and they would be more than happy to make a knife for you if you want one. And because I use scrap metals, a lot of these blades come out really well, and I use them on a daily basis, and they're just fine. But I would not feel comfortable passing them along to someone who actually is going to spend good money on them, simply because I can't tell you that if the leaf spring I've used has microfractures in it. I can't tell you if the file that I used is actually 1095 and it heat treated properly. I can test them, and they may pass the test, but there's just no certainty when it comes to me because of my lack of experience. Now, these guys with a lot of experience and that have studied for years know what they're doing, and they could definitely put something out that's worthwhile. And honestly, I just don't have the inclination to do that. I love experimentation, I love putting this together, but it's just not my number one thing. So for those of you who have asked, can you buy a blade from me? How much do I sell them for? The answer is, well, I don't. And for those reasons, I cannot guarantee performance. And if you wanted it to hang on your wall, that would be okay too, but most of them are hanging on my wall, so there's that. Alright, this piece that we're putting on the edge of this billet is going to be our actual cutting edge, and it's the Allen wrench that we started out with in the beginning. And the reason I'm adding it is because I want a good solid piece on the edge that is going to definitely be centered on the billet. And the other thing is that I want a contrasting sort of edge on this thing, which I think with the mild steel and the bandsaw blades is going to look pretty good. I hope. We'll have to find out. So I'm setting this weld by hand. because I don't want to put it under the power hammer and take a chance of this folding sideways, because it is rather narrow. It's a 1/2 inch wide at this point, and it seems to be welding up quite nicely. And the other thing is that when you're working with different carbon levels in steel, mild steel is obviously going to move a little quicker and easier than the high carbon steel. And this is true when you quench and heat treat. The expansion and contraction rates of these two different steels is going to be different. So there's always a chance that they could pull themselves apart in a quench or even a heat treat. But we will see what happens here. It's all a bit of a chance, and I'm putting a lot of work into this, mostly for the experimentation side of it. I like experimenting with this sort of thing so that if I do run into a problem, an issue, and I can show someone else what went wrong, they may be able to use it and that information in the future. So I cut these little notches in here, and I'm able to just squish out my tang with the press. It's a little quicker and easier than hammering it out, and I get a little more square shoulder. I'll still have to file those to make them exact, but this is a pretty easy way to do it. I've seen somebody else do this online, but I'm not exactly sure who. I don't remember who's done that, but I picked it up from someone. If you know who that is, go ahead and put it in the comments, and I will thank them later for that. Anyway, we're going to hammer in some bevels and hammer this guy out flat, and that's going to curve our tip up a little bit, and we're basically building a sax here. I like that shape, and the materials I've got are going to lend themselves to that a little bit. Back over to we've been using the surface grinder a lot in this build, which is kind of fun, and it does a really good job. It saves me on, well, the 2x72 until we get to the bevels anyway. And my little beveling jig, and right now we've got a 36 grit on there, and I worked my way down to I think it was a 220 grit. We went for an acid etch, some ferric chloride, to see what our contrast is looking like. And you can see the bandsaw blades are the dark, the mild steel is the lighter color, and that file down the center of that didn't come out so dark. You can see it there, but it's just not as dark as everything else. It's looking pretty good so far, and I'm liking this pattern. But you know, sometimes you don't always get what you want. So we're getting it up to temperature. We go for the quench, and this is peanut oil, by the way, that I'm quenching in. A lot of professionals don't like that, but for me it's cheap, easy, and quick. We get her all cleaned up here. And I got it down to, it's a 120 grit, and you can see that dark line. There's a crack. It's towards the tip, but it goes all the way through the blade. So you can see my little white diagonal chalk line that goes right behind it. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut it off right there and regrind the tip. So recently, First Degree Forge posted on Instagram a knife he was making. He ended up breaking the tip and having to regrind the end of it. And he says he doesn't make mistakes, he just makes shorter knives. So I guess that's what I'm doing here. Anyway, cutting it off with the grinding wheel messed with the temper and all that, so I re-quenched it. I quenched it probably a little hotter than I should have, but that edge that was on there wasn't quite as hard as I wanted it to be, so I brought the temperature up on the quench a little bit the second time around. Things seemed to work out okay. We had a little bit of wiggle in the edge of the blade, so when I put it in for tempering, I clamped a couple of pieces of steel on either side of it, put it in the vise, let it cool down after that, and it came out a real nice straw color, so I was very happy with that. So in my opinion, it is possible to make a decent knife out of scrap steel. It's in my opinion, again, acceptable. I am not, like I said, a knife maker, and those professionals who have those arguments all the time, I'll leave that up to them. But there's a really good video by Valhalla Ironworks that he put out on the subject, and it shows both sides, and I think he did a really good job of presenting both sides. And if you get a chance, you should go check that out. I will leave a link in the description below, and I encourage you to go take a look at that. If the more people that watch that, I think the better that discussion is going to be for everyone. All right, so I like the way the pattern came out. Left it in a little longer. That edge came out a little bit darker. Okay, we're going to put a handle together for this thing. And like I said, it's mahogany. We got some ebony, and we've got some brass. We're going to just put this thing together with. Pretty simple construction. We will be gluing it on, but yeah, we're all going to make it all fit together, and then secure it with a little acorn nut. Anyway, so doing the mild steel pattern, welded steel, modern Damascus, whatever you want to call it, is I think a good idea for anyone who doesn't have access to 15 and 20 or can't afford it, or that kind of thing. I don't think that in sort of a sandmine situation where it's not the cutting edge of a blade, I think it makes a great jacket. I think it makes some attractive steel. So I don't really see anything wrong with that. I think it's a pretty cool idea, actually. So take that where you will. Now you're going to notice that the tip of this blade is a little bit different shape. I reground the tip of it, gave it a little more curve up, and made the angle a little steeper. Or a little less steep. It was a little too steep for me, so we gave it a little more of a sax look to it. Alright, and yeah, I could have cut some of this material down rather than grinding it all off, but it really only took about 10-15 minutes, and I had this handle ground down to where it's at right here. And I took it down to about a 300 grit paper. I've already got the bolster on, and then I put a piece of ebony on top of that, the handle back on, another piece of ebony, and I'm going to regrind the pommel because it was just a little too small, and I want to grind it to match that ebony. And the threads were long enough on our tang that we welded on that worked out just fine. Alright, get some glue on this guy. And this was a little sticky and gooey. I forgot to put my little rubber gloves on, and my glue started setting up, so I just heck with it and went with it. But yeah, this stuff gets a little bit gooey, and it's hard to get off your hands once it starts setting up. This is 5-minute epoxy Gorilla Glue. I think this is probably only maybe the second time I've used Gorilla Glue. Usually I use I think it's a 3M product, something like that. But it seemed to work pretty good. I think they're all about the same. Alright. And we'll get that top piece of ebony put on there, and then the pommel. And we'll get our everything lined up. A little bit of epoxy and get this nut on here. I don't see any reason to ever take that nut off again, but if I do, I can just heat it up and it'll come back off. But alright, so I took it to the buffer after it dried and buffed it all off. It wasn't too exciting, so I just left that footage out. But there you go. That wood buffed up really nicely. And so did the fittings. And we still got just a little bit of glue down in there we'll have to clean off. A little razor blade or something. And here's the final product, guys. There you go. Didn't come out too bad. Like I said, reground that tip. Looks a little better. I like the pattern. It's nice and sharp. Holds an edge real nice. And we did the brass rod test on the edge as described by Sam Towns of Sam Towns Bladesmith. And it deflected really nicely and came right back to shape. So I think we did okay. Alrighty. Well, there you go. It seemed to work out really well. We had a few lumps and bumps along the way, but we figured them out. We ended up with a little smaller knife than we thought we were going to, but it all worked out. And I like it. It came out pretty darn good. Not too bad, not too bad. Holds an edge real nice. And there you go. Alright, guys. So thanks for hanging out with us here at Big Dog Forge this time around. And we'll see you for the next video. Thanks, guys. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. Bye-bye now.